Welcome, and thank you for joining for tonight's CRO Career Conversation. My name is Vivian Doling, and I serve as Vice President of Emerging Company Development at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, and I co-lead our NC CRO Collaborative with my colleague, Laura Raleigh. While North Carolina is a leader in clinical research, career opportunities in the field remain elusive to many. Through this event series, we'll be inviting professionals from the CRO industry and research sites to speak candidly about their own experience and provide more information about the many rewarding career opportunities that exist. We recommend using Zoom Gallery View tonight so that you can see all of our speakers. While attendees are muted to avoid potential disruptions, we encourage you to submit questions to the Q&A function. There's also an option to upvote questions. If you see someone else submit a question that you're curious about, give it a thumbs up. We'll be devoting the last 30 minutes to answer your question, and we'll prioritize those with the most clicks. Without further delay, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Carolina Carusco from IQVIA, to introduce herself and kick off tonight's discussion on first steps on your journey to a career in clinical research.
Thank you, Vivian. Real appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everyone. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to discuss first steps in clinical research. I'm really excited about the discussion tonight. Clinical research is a great and wonderful world and brings a lot of opportunities for all of us. And I'm sure you are going to be asking a lot of questions on how you make your first steps into this wonderful world of clinical research. I work for IQVIA. I'm a senior director in site management. My group, it's all the CRAs that work on clinical trials. I head the internal medicine or IDV group. We've been really close leading the effort for the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's been extremely rewarding, a lot of hours, a lot of work, but definitely something that we are very invested on, because we're not only working for IQVIA, but for the whole world to try to go back to the new normal. So with that, I would like to take a few minutes to kind of let you know how did I start my career in IQVIA. And I've been working with IQVIA for almost 23 years. So I have done my whole career within IQVIA. One of the things that IQVIA was able to provide to me was the opportunity to develop myself. I started my career knowing nothing about clinical research, nothing at all. So you are much better positioned than I was when I started my career at IQVIA. I just respond to an ad to the newspaper, very old fashioned, and send my CV. They call me, they interview me, and they put me on a week training, and they send me off to monitor. That was my my first opportunity in clinical research. It was extremely difficult because clinical research has their own language, has their own little things they have to learn. There's a lot of acronyms that you probably have heard, like CRO, Clinical Research Organization, CRAs, Clinical Research Assistants, and there are multiple more that you can probably complete a book of acronyms if we want to. I was a CRA for many years, and then I moved to a CTL or clinical team lead position. That's where you lead a group of CRAs on a specific clinical trial. And I did most of my work on vaccines. And then I fell in love with management, and I moved into line management. And then I was the head of the office in Santiago, Chile. And then I moved to Mexico. I was there for 5 years, and then I moved to the US. So IQVIA not only has allowed me to learn about clinical research, work on clinical trials, but also to work with people across the globe, which I think it's one of the things that is very compelling to me. one of the things that has kept me in IQVIA and probably doing clinical research is the fact that I probably have never had 2 days that are look alike. Every day is a different challenge. Every day probably is going to be something new to learn. I love to learn, and that has kept me busy and really, really happy. So with that, I will ask my panelists to introduce themselves and make sure that you mention how you started your career within clinical research and the company you're working for. And perhaps we can start with Morgan.
Sure, thank you. My name is Morgan Campbell. I came into clinical research. I was actually a special education teacher for 6 years, and really just looking for a career change. Having a bachelor's of science in special education, I wasn't really sure what I was qualified to do outside of the educational system. And I happened to have a close friend of mine who left teaching as well to go into the clinical research field, and used her as a reference, and was able to begin my journey there. There were a lot of skills that I used in teaching that carried over to the clinical research field, such as just being able to multitask, being able to organize, being self-initiative, prioritizing various deadlines and assignments that are given out throughout, various projects. So having those skills kind of bled naturally into the clinical research field. But I agree with Carolina, it was definitely a very overwhelming start. There is so much to learn, but it is very much a trainable field. I was with a different company than I'm with now. When I first started, I'm currently with Icon or Legacy PRA. And the opportunity for growth is just mind blowing. I think that is something that I have been most impressed by, is the amount of growth and the various avenues that you can travel down within this field.
Thank you, Morgan. Emily?
Hey everyone, my name is Emily Michel. So I am, I think I just froze for a second. Hey everyone, I'm Emily. I'm a senior CTA, so a clinical trial assistant, and I work for PSI. I've been with PSI for a little bit over a year now, and I started at a different company as well, but before that, how I got into the industry, I worked in a lab at Duke, so doing the preclinical stuff, so producing proteins, working on vaccine development, I guess all the way over there, which now, we do clinical trials for humans. But so I was over in that field, and I have a bachelor's degree in science and biology. So I like the science field and I wanted to do science, but I just got to the point where it was a little bit repetitive for me being in a lab, and I wanted to be involved in the science, but maybe not the one like physically pipetting and doing it myself. And so honestly, how to get into it, I just was looking for other science related jobs. There's postings. I mean, there's so many openings in North Carolina, RTP in general. So I kind of found them that way. There was a family friend of mine that was in the industry. So through my dad, we kind of had like a conversation to learn more about it. Otherwise, honestly, Google was my friend to find out about it, because like Vivian, I think Carolina, you were saying, it's an industry that people don't necessarily know that much about, and it's so large. It's crazy to me. Once you get in, there's so many different departments and avenues to go down, like Morgan, you said, and I think that whenever we can try to spread the word, I try to do that. And so I'm excited about this event. I'm sure we'll get more into it later, how we got in and our experiences, but welcome. And I'm excited that everyone is here.
Thank you, Emily. Mayor Lindsay?
Hey, so my name is Mary Lindsay Haley. I work at Premier Research. I am currently in a dual role, so I'm a project manager here at Premier, and I'm also a manager in our project planning and management group. So I, like Carolina, I'm a line manager, and I oversee our project specialists, which in other companies you might hear them called by different terms. So project management assistant, sort of similar. And our associate project managers that we are growing into the project manager role. I got into this industry very similar to as Morgan. Our stories pretty much mirror each other. I too was a teacher, so I was an elementary in elementary education, teaching first grade for 7 years. So also had a pretty big career shift. Like Morgan, I had a friend that was in the industry, and that is really the only way I knew about the industry. I wasn't exposed to this other than, she had kind of gotten into it and I knew about it from her. And it was just really interesting to kind of always hear about the different projects and things she was working on. And I think, being someone that was in education, which is, a job you go into, right? Because you want to help people, you want to help people learn and grow and all of those things. I still wanted to be in an industry and have a career where I felt like I was making a difference. I wasn't just doing something for a paycheck. And I think, kind of like Carolina was speaking to with like the COVID-19 vaccines, like with all the awareness now with COVID-19 that is brought to this industry, you can really see the impact that it's made. So I'm really glad to be a part of it. I came into Premier from another CRO. I had been in another CRO for about a year, and I came into Premier as a project specialist. And just worked my way up that career pathway into, a senior project specialist, an associate project manager, and then a project manager. And now I'm into that line management role as well. So again, kind of echoing what some of these panelists have said, there is a lot of opportunity in this industry. There's a lot of room for growth, and there's a lot of room, like once you get in, there's different avenues and pathways that you can take. So it's a great industry, and it's a great time to be getting into this industry.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. Lindsay, appreciate it. So we talked a little bit, and I think we all touched on the same, on how we kind of became familiar with the CRO industry. Probably if we can say one or two things you all did to become more familiar before you start looking for a job. And then from your current position, perhaps where else people can think about expanding their careers. So you have your current role, what else the industry offers in terms of opportunities for all of you. And I'm sure there are multiple, so probably 2 or 3 that you can mention that are attractive to you and why they're so attractive. Maybe Morgan, we'll start with you again.
So I know when I first got or started even thinking about approaching the subject of jumping from teaching into clinical research, not knowing anything about it, being a complete deer in headlights. I definitely really just used the people I knew. So I cannot tell you how many hour-long conversations I had with my friend who was currently in it. She had been in it for about a year before I made the switch. So had enough experience under her belt to really be able to kind of paint a day in the life. So she was currently in the maintenance delivery department, seeing trials through the maintenance phase. And that's where I started as well. I'm now in the startup department, working with sites to get them activated on clinical trials. But really it's, if you know someone that's in the field, definitely don't hesitate to ask them questions. I asked all the questions. I remember her talking to me about the studies that she was on and the different acronyms that she was using, and just also researching. Like Emily said, Google is your friend. You can Google anything and you will find information. So just kind of getting that background knowledge before I went in was very helpful, and definitely kind of gave me that little boost of confidence that, okay, I can see how what my natural abilities are and what my natural skills are can kind of bleed into this career as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then as far as other fields that this kind of leads into, so like I said, I'm currently a site activation specialist working with sites and startup. And there are a plethora of opportunities to go from where I am right now. I'm currently actually looking at a line management position myself, and I'm working closely with my line manager to kind of move up into that role. But there's also the opportunity to move into a CRA or clinical research associate field where you're traveling to sites and monitoring with sites. There's opportunity to go into a project management position, working your way up through that avenue revenue. So there really is just no dead end. I mean, it's really such an open field. You really can go anywhere.
And Morgan, you mentioned startup and site activation, and I think probably you can 2 or 3 bullet points on what you do and why it's so important. Her role, Morgan's role in a life of a study, it's critical. So we want to make sure that everyone understands how important this role is.
Yes, absolutely. So we work very closely between sites and sponsors. So obviously I am a liaison for the sponsor with our sites, but I work even more closely with the sites to collect all of the documentation that is required for these sites to get up and running. So documents that are required to be submitted to the FDA for review, for our sponsor audits to be held, just to make sure that they are capable and have the means to even be able to run the trial at that site and treat these patients. So everything from financial disclosure forms and site staff personnel documentation and making sure that they're IRB approved, and with collecting all of this documentation, there's a deadline. Sponsors have deadlines for wanting to get these sites up and running. And so it is a very fast-paced field. It can be very challenging, especially when you have multiple sites at one time, or you're activating sites around the holidays, which is my world right now. But Carolina mentioned earlier, you don't ever stop learning in this role, and it's challenging in its own way. It's a healthy level of stress. And I like the fast pace of it. I like the challenge. I like that I am site facing, and then I have the opportunity to collaborate and network with so many individuals internally and externally. But yes, like you said, it is an extremely critical role. And I think that that's what I enjoy most about this position, because like Mary Lindsay said, the same thing when I was teaching, it was purposeful, it was fulfilling, and I didn't want to switch to a career that wasn't fulfilling. And being in this position, knowing that I have a very important part in these trials is extremely fulfilling. So it's definitely been a well-enjoyed journey thus far.
Great. Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate it. Emily, probably you want to highlight how you became familiar with the CRO industry. What were the things, how you learned about it? And from your role, which also probably I would like you to bullet 2 or 3 things. Your role also is very critical for the clinical trial industry and how to run a trial. So I would like for everyone to understand how you position yourself and what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, so again, Google, trying to find the background was really helpful. Again, if you know someone, I know not everyone knows someone, you don't need to know someone, it's not a requirement, but you can definitely research yourself and find out a lot of information. I guess also, if you do think you're interested in a position in clinical research, when you're applying to jobs and interviewing or talking to recruiters, they give you a lot of information as well. So you can find out information you didn't commit to the job yet. You can find out information that way too. So I don't think that it stops just ahead of the application process, but during the application process, always asking questions. And again, not being afraid that you don't know enough before going in. There are so many positions that you don't need to know anything really ahead of time. They built in, like at PSI, for me, I had previous experience at another CRO, but for me, I still had a month of training. I wasn't assigned to studies yet. When you're brand new, you might even have 2 months. So it's not, most companies, you're not going to be thrown into, here you go, good luck, like sink or swim. No, you will get the background information, the training that you need to succeed. And so I wouldn't worry also about that as well. Like if you're not able to really research and find out everything you need to know ahead of time, that's okay. And so I guess I would also say that, being okay with knowing that you don't know everything. Because again, we still don't know everything. And I learn something new every single day. It's very surprising. Sometimes you're like, wow, cool, okay. So yeah, I guess that is what I say about that. For my job, yeah, so I am a senior clinical trial assistant. So most companies, so we do the site management. That's what it's referred to as. So most companies, someone like Morgan does the startup. And so they go, they get them activated. So the site is activated, they're up and running, they get study drug, and they're ready to start enrolling patients. And then it's kind of like the maintenance phase, it's called, well, enrollment and maintenance. So they're enrolling patients, they're kind of moving along in the study, and someone needs to basically like help them and support them throughout the trial. And then we also do, the site management people normally do the closure as well at the very end. So we grab them after startup and we're with them the whole time. So that means a lot of different things. That means, answering their questions. That means maintaining the trial master file, which we haven't really gotten into that, but that's basically all documents that we need to maintain for the clinical trial. And so basically the site has to have a copy of everything on site. And then we have the same thing that matches on our side. And so maintaining that. If there's a new protocol, we send it to the sites. If they have a new investigator on the study, we need to collect the documents for them. So it's a mix of us asking the site for things and sending them things, basically maintaining and keeping the site in tip-top shape for the trial and through closeout, because in one of my studies right now, they're going through an FDA inspection not because of anything bad, but because they're submitting to the FDA. So the FDA now has to go and check these sites to make sure, okay, can we, take this data to be valid and compliant and everything else? Like, we need to check now. So we needed to have kept them and maintain them and helps them stay clean throughout the whole trial so that now we can pass with flying colors, hopefully. And so that, I guess, is my role. And also, again, just to be a liaison between the sponsor and the site. You're kind of like a middleman for updates and questions and kind of just helping them and being part of the team and moving along. But site management is like the term that's used. And I'm in like clinical operations. So we're kind of a group with the monitors. So we work very closely with monitors as well, because they're the ones that are traveling. So monitor is the same thing as CRA, so the clinical research associate. So they're the ones traveling. We work with them because if they're going on site and we need to collect something, that's a great time to collect that document, because then the site doesn't have to email it to you. So working with the monitors. So a lot of our job is working with internal teammates. So my internal CRO team, external being both sponsor and sites. So you work with a lot of different people. And with that being said, getting used to requests coming at you from every which way. It's not just your internal team saying, hey, can you please do this? But the sites are coming to you, the sponsors coming to you with a request. So definitely juggling that is something that you have to get used to, but it keeps it interesting. No day is the same, ever. I will say that.
Right.
And I guess the last thing, I was going to speak to the other things that you can like move to. So like Morgan said, you can definitely, all these different avenues. I mean, you can move up and be, like I could move to be a monitor. You could do line management movement. You could also move to different departments. So, I mean, I don't think that companies would really, you'd have to probably still interview, but you could move to data management. You could move to vendor management. So work with the different vendors. You could move to quality assurance and you could be an auditor for your company. Like you can do, honestly, it seems kind of endless to me. So that's really exciting and really cool. And I think is a really great benefit and positive aspect of this industry. It's really exciting.
Thank you, Emily. And Mayor Lindsay, how do you became familiar with the CRO industry? And probably from where you're sitting, you said you are kind of doing a dual role right now, but where's that next step going to take you? What other avenues you can take in your career within the industry?
Yeah, so I came to kind of, learn about the industry. Like I said, I did have my friend who was already in the industry, and again, much like Morgan, pestered her with a million questions, and she was very patient and, really gave me a lot of insight, which helped me kind of prepare for my interview. That being said, if you don't necessarily know someone in the industry, like Emily was saying, Google is your friend. There's so much information out there now about clinical research. So I think, that's definitely somewhere to turn to. But part of it too, once you get your job and you're in clinical research, you're still learning. I know Emily said like she learns something new every day. And I think a key thing to do is find those people that you seem to kind of connect with and really work on developing those relationships. Find yourself a mentor. When I started at my first company, we didn't have like an official mentoring program, so to speak, but there was someone who I could just tell was like very supportive, wanted to kind of teach me, wanted to see me grow. And so I really, developed this relationship with her. And I still keep in contact to her, to this day, 6 years later, even though we haven't worked together for 5 years. And we can ask each other for advice and things. And, a lot of companies now, I think, have actually implemented mentor programs that you can sign up for. So I encourage you, like at Premier, we have one, and you could be matched with someone in your role if that's what you want. Or, Emily was just shouting out like a lot of different kind of areas you can go into, like data management, quality assurance, safety. You could, if you have an interest in those different roles, you can find a mentor there as well, and keep continuing to evolve and learn about your role. Again, I think really developing those relationships is a really important thing, and you'll always learn once you're even in your role or in your company. You'll continue, to learn and grow. Carolina, to your question about, I guess, where do I see myself going kind of for my dual role? So I am in this kind of project management role right now, as well as a line manager, overseeing the project specialists and associate project managers. But what we're doing too, and I think you'll see a lot of this with all of the growth in the industry, there's a need to really increase our training offerings. So that is something that, we at Premier are working on, and I'm sure, I see everyone on the call, their heads are nodding. So I know, I'm sure they're all doing the same, working to expand, the training offerings that we already have, because we are bringing in so many new people in the door. And that's an initiative I see myself, I've kind of got the ball rolling with that for a lot of our group. And I see myself kind of supporting and heading that up in the future. So, if you have, a desire to teach and to help others, once you get into the industry and learn about it, there's going to be opportunity for you to take training roles as well. So there's lots of different pathways you can go into.
Fantastic. Absolutely agree. I think one of the things about this industry is the many multiple areas where you can actually continue to grow and learn. And I know for a starting position or for your first role within the industry, it seems really strange to think about the future or future roles. But I think it's important that we all know or start learning as you get into your first role, into what other opportunities the companies have to offer and the industry has to offer as well. Okay, so we have talked about the careers, what the CRO industry. Let's talk a little bit about the interview process. And I'm going to ask different questions to the panelists around their experience around the interview process. So Morgan, when you interview, what was the question that caught your eye and after the interview you thought, I should have said something different, or I should have answered that differently?
So the interview process that I went through was a problem solving model. Because you come into this role and you don't really know anything about it. It's not a requirement to know anything about it. It's not a requirement that you've done anything in clinical research before. And I was used to interviews where tell me about how you teach kids how to read, and what's a strategy for solving math problems. I had no idea what they were going to ask me. So I definitely did a lot of research on the problem solving model and just kind of tried to come up with scenarios that had from previous jobs that I had that kind of applied to some of those questions in that problem solving model. But I will say the most challenging question, I think the one that struck me the most was tell me about a time you missed a deadline and how did you fix it? Because how many of us want to admit a fault in an interview? I want the job. I don't want you to take the job away from me. So I think that was definitely something that made me nervous to answer. I mean, I was definitely very upfront and honest. We're all human. But definitely that was one that stuck with me when I left, I was like, oh, I hope I answered that one okay.
That actually is one of my favorite questions.
Yeah.
When I do the interviewing process.
You learn a lot about how people problem solve in that, with that question. You really learn about, okay, well, how are you able to mitigate any additional risks with that?
Correct. Thank
Yep.
you, Mark. Emily, how about your interview process, and what were the things the interviews were looking for on your role when you interview?
Yeah, I think not really your experience, because again, they can train that. It's more about they're looking for your work ethic, if you are, organized, if you're a good communicator. That's really big because you work with a lot of different people. I know we're all remote right now for the most part still, but you still are communicating with people all day via email and meetings and everything else, like being able to talk to different people, especially if hard situations come up. That, I guess, a focus on also the ability to juggle a lot of different things, which I mentioned before, because most positions, not all, but a lot of positions in the clinical research industry have a few different studies. So I am not on only one study, I am on 3. So that means that you have requests coming from different projects. So you need to be able to prioritize, and also not just prioritize, but give them not necessarily equal, because it depends how much you're allocated, but like you have to give the dedicated amount of time. You can't only do one study. So I guess the focus on being able to juggle multiple different tasks and priorities, as well as, I think the biggest thing that was a focus was the ability to, okay, you're starting the day, you have a schedule of what you think your day is going to look like. I mean, we all are there, we're in the morning like, okay, this is what I'm going to do today. And then how are you going to react when something gets dropped that is very urgent, that should have been done somehow, even though you weren't told about it yesterday? Like, how are you going to react? That was a big one for me. Well, you just gotta, figure out what you can push aside, and you need to do that right now. So being okay with those switching priorities, of course, I'm not going to say that I don't get stressed out about it. Of course I do. But I think it is, like Morgan said earlier, like a healthy level. That to me motivates me. I'm like, okay, let's go. This needs to be done right now. Who do I need to talk to? Do I need to confirm something with? Do I need approval for something first? Like, what do I need to do? That was a big focus for me in interviews. Like, okay, how do you react when these different situations occur? I guess just trying to figure out people's problem solving methods, their organization, and are they okay if something gets dropped on their day and the whole schedule goes over there, and you just got to be okay with it.
I think you might be on mute, Carolina.
Sorry, my dog really wanted to participate. So apologies for that. So from your experience with interviewing, can you perhaps walk us through 3 or 4 tips that you can give to this audience in terms of what to do, how to prepare? And then the other thing is, how long did it take you to be able to interview, and perhaps how many times you had to interview? You want to share that too?
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of talk to this from a couple perspectives. So one is the person interviewing, or being interviewed, I guess I should say. And then also is someone that is interviewing people now to come into this role. So as someone that was being interviewed for the role, I was on I had 3 separate interviews. So it wasn't like a panel interview with 3 people at the same time. It was 3 separate people on my first interview getting into the role. And, you know, a lot of obviously what I had to talk to, because at the time I did not have any clinical research experience, was, again, it's all those transferable skills. So really what you need to do is look at what you can do now, right? Whether it be like you're fresh out of college or whatever, and with the skill sets you have, or you're already in kind of a different role in the skill sets you have, and how are they transferable to that role that you want now? You know, I won't go into kind of too many of the things, because I know Morgan said some of this already, but, you know, just to kind of expand a little bit on the transferable skills she was talking about. You know, as a teacher, you're tracking a lot of things, right? Well, coming into this industry, you are tracking a lot of things, and you're also analyzing that data that you're tracking, which is just like you do as a teacher. You're analyzing the data trends from your students, you know, test scores and things like that. So how can you apply that here? And so really, like, taking the time to prepare yourself and think about looking at like that job description that you're applying for, and being able to really speak in a tailored way to how you can still bring benefit to the organization and with the skills that you have, because there's definitely so many, you know, different transferable skills. And then from the perspective, I guess, as someone giving an interview, because now I'm in the line manager position, we are interviewing for the project specialist. That is what we look for. We look for someone who can really speak to their skills and how they are transferable to the organization. We also look for, you know, even if you don't have clinical research experience, we do like to see, you know, some technology experience. So are you familiar with Excel, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint? MS Project is something we like to see. It's not required, but it's a timeline tool. Again, if you don't have it, we can teach it. It's part of all of the training that we're all rolling out. Another thing we really look for, truly, we really test for like a cultural fit. So we want someone who really seems like they are willing to be a team player. We want people that really seem motivated and interested. So even if they don't know about the industry, they're really willing to learn about it. So we kind of try to pressure test that. And we also look to try to figure out like what kinds of things might frustrate someone, or what kind of things motivate someone, to see if they'll be a good fit. So, you know, it's kind of a mix, right? It's some of those situational questions, like what would you do if you had multiple deadlines? How do you manage that? And I'm sure almost, you know, whether you, like I said, it's in college and you've got multiple papers due in one day, right? And a test the next and all of that. How are you prioritizing that? You can transfer that over. So it's a mix of like situational questions, behavioral questions. And again, like really the biggest thing I would say we look for isn't direct CRO experience. It's that fit, that motivation, that drive. It seems like someone's going to take an initiative. It seems like even if they're not, or if you're not already in the role, you've at least done that little bit of like basic research to speak to some things. You might not know, you can't probably answer, you know, every question we would ask you, but like if we ask you for a basic understanding of like, what is a clinical trial, you can speak to it at least in a general sense, and you've shown that you've put some time and effort into doing some research behind it. And I think that really goes a long way versus not being able to speak to it at all. I think you might still be on mute.
So sorry. I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight that probably everyone said one way or another was the transfer of skills. You may not have the experience that it is required to start on a position on the CRO industry. However, you may have skills that we want and we need for sure. I think about those. And also the other thing that it was mentioned that I think is really, really important is to find a really good fit with the culture of the company. Not all companies are created equal. And that's why we have so many companies working on this field. And I think you have to do your research and make sure that what you're the companies you're applying are fit for what they are going to be a good fit with your on how you want to continue your career. So it's really important to do some research on the companies that you're applying as well. I think that's important. Big companies behave a bit different than smaller companies. Big companies have a lot of advantages, a lot of disadvantages as well, and the other way around is true as well. So make sure that you do that research, understand what are the different opportunities, different CROs that are out there, and that they're all probably offering opportunities right now. But it is real important, transferable skills. How do you make yourself stand out? I think that's also important. And what are the values of that company? I think that's important too. They need to match your values as well, right? And I think that's also something to look when you're interviewing. That's probably, for me, was really important. I didn't know the company, but when I start having a conversation during my interview many years ago, we talk a lot about what was the goal of the company, what they wanted to do, the future, etc. And it really resonated with me and what I wanted to do. So 23 years later, here I am sitting in the same company. So for sure, it was a really good conversation. And I think the other thing is never be afraid to ask questions about things that you don't know or things that may not be clear to you when you're interviewing. That's the I always tell my managers that are reporting to me, the interview process is not you determining if that person is a good fit. It's all of us determining if this is going to be a good marriage. And hopefully that's not going to end into a divorce. So that's the goal, right? To continue that relationship for a really long time. I think that's very important when you're interviewing. So think about that when you're interviewing. It should be a conversation. It should not be a Q&A where you are only asked questions and you're not allowed to ask questions or seek more information for the role that you're applying to. Okay, so Morgan, one more question for you. When you started your career, your role, name the most challenging thing when you first started.
I would say probably just learning the language. The amount of acronyms that there are and the number of documents that there are that are involved with, between maintaining the trial. I like I said, I used to be in Emily's position or a similar position and now being in startup, and having that experience in site management definitely gave me the time to learn those documents. But that was, and that part of the trial, but I think that was probably the hardest part was learning what everybody was talking about around me. I remember having several conversations with colleagues and they'd be like, yeah, you need the ML and the CV and the FD. I'm like, I don't know what that is. What are those things? So that definitely was probably the most challenging and daunting part. It's learnable. It's doable. It's just a little overwhelming in the beginning. And if you can get past that part and just hang on and really use your resources, and like Lindsay said, having a mentor. I know many companies now, the company I was with and the company I'm with now, both have mentor programs. I serve as a mentor to many new hires. And so having that person to lean on is definitely beneficial. But like we've all said, and I think we could say it till we're blue in the face, you just have to be confident enough to ask the question. I mean, that's the only way you will learn in this field. You will not learn if you don't ask the question. And there's no wrong question to be asked. So ask away.
Probably if you have that question, many others have the same question.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Emily, I'm going to change the question for you and probably ask you, what would you wish you had learned before you started your position?
Yeah. That's a little bit of a harder question because like we've all said, you don't necessarily like need to have the background, not that much of the background knowledge about, you know, how exactly a clinical trial is run. I guess maybe I wish I had done a little bit more research about not because you're a lot of the entry level positions are in these site management roles, and so I think that I thought maybe that was like the only way to get in, and so I guess maybe looking further into different departments because they do have entry level stuff too. I think just the sheer number of the amount of roles and positions out there, openings right now, you see a lot of the clinical operations, the site management. And so I think I thought that was like my only way in. And I like where I am right now. I really do. But I guess it would have been interesting also to see like, okay, what does a entry level quality assurance person do? So doing more on that and not just being like, I want to get in, how do I get in?
And I think that's a really good point, Emily. Perhaps a lot of everyone on the call, perhaps they're familiar with the clinical research associate or the monitor. Probably that's the one that stands out the most because they're out there, right? We actually see them every day. But there are so many other roles in this industry that are entry level that are available, and sometimes we don't I don't think people know how to research those opportunities. So when you're perhaps interviewing for opportunities, you can always ask if there are other opportunities or other positions that are available within the same organization that may be a good fit for you. RSU startup, there are wonderful opportunities to start, but there are many others depending on the company. So I think that, Emily, was a really good point. I think everyone has to keep that in mind. Keep your options open. I think that's really important when you're trying to break into the research industry. Mary Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to describe your average day. And I know every day is different, but maybe kind of take us through what you do usually, meetings, how much face time do you have, or face-to-face time, if you have any at this point, phone calls, etc.
Yeah. So I think Carolina would describe this from the project specialist perspective, since I think that's the role that we're talking about today. So as a project specialist, your day-to-day is really you're the right-hand man, so to speak, of your project manager. What does that mean? You are really kind of helping oversee the whole, collaboration of the team on the study. So you are responsible for scheduling all of the meetings. You're responsible for creating agendas for those meetings, taking minutes at those meetings, tracking action items and decisions from those meetings. In addition to that, you'll be the one responsible for creating system setup during study start. You'll be the one in charge of granting access or removing access as team members come on or leave the study. You'll be doing a lot of tracking. Again, kind of like we mentioned with the action items, you'll be tracking different contacts on the team, all of their, information and start dates. You will be responsible for compiling the studies team's training that's related to the study, and making sure that that's rolled out to everyone. For example, anytime a new protocol amendment comes out, you're the one responsible for making sure that that is added to, the learning management system and rolled out to your team for training. You're responsible for helping with timelines. So managing, the timelines and all of those different pieces that impact the different things and how that stays on track so that you can make sure you're meeting those milestones that your sponsor is looking for. You're responsible for the TMF. So I think Emily kind of spoke to that a bit earlier, the trial master file. Essentially, if you can imagine like a file cabinet with different folders, if that's what your TMF is, it's just electronic. It's all of the different documents for the trial. And different roles are responsible for different documents and ensuring they're filed. But as the project specialist, you actually have oversight of the whole thing and supporting your project manager and making sure everyone is filing the documents for which they're responsible and following up. And, you know, just following up with the team on anything. So like your day to day, you might have, depending, you know, on how many projects you're on, you might have, you know, 2 or 3 team meetings, whether it be an internal or a sponsor call. You've probably got some access requests to manage. You've got minutes to take. You've got documents to submit. You might have project plans you're supporting with. So it's a lot of administrative type activities to start. And then as you kind of work your way up and get more experience when you're working with your project manager, you'll get more of like the management opportunities. So you might jump in and start helping with some of like the vendor management and things like that. So it's a really great role to get exposure to kind of lots of different parts of the organization, I think, since you're kind of working with the project manager on coordinating it all. And then you have that opportunity for that project management pathway too, if that's something you're interested in.
Great. Do you have any involvement with the financial part of the studies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carolina. So as well as a project specialist, you'll be supporting your project manager in that financial oversight. So a lot of what we do is, you know, you've got your budget, you've got your contract with the sponsor. A lot of times your sponsor is going to request additional things that are not in your original contract, and we call that out of scope. So for example, just to say something kind of simple, maybe you're budgeted for a meeting every other week and your sponsor wants you to meet every week, or you're budgeted to activate 10 sites, but your sponsor wants you to add 5 more sites. So as a project specialist, that might be something that you're tracking in an out of scope log to help your project manager be aware of the types of things that they'll need to include in an updated change order and an amendment to the contract. And you will also be responsible for helping forecast out different activities on the study, how much time you think they'll take, and when those activities will wrap up.
Fantastic. It's a really interesting role. It has a really, like you said, a really nice view on what is happening for the whole study, for the whole clinical trial. And I think it's a really nice opportunity to go and learn from other roles. From there, you probably can move to any other role if you want. So that experience is fantastic. Okay. We have talked about how much we work, how much we love to work on different clinical trials. Morgan, how about work-life balance? How is your day? Do you own your schedule? How do you approach your day, your life and your work?
So I will say one of the biggest attractions of this industry and leaving teaching, and I know for a fact Mary Lindsay will agree with me, was the fact that there was work-life balance in this role. I remember after starting in clinical research, my very first weekend, after my first week of work, I had no idea what to do with myself because I had no lesson plans to do. My day ended on Friday, or my week ended on Friday, and I was done. It was fabulous. But I will say that the company I previously worked for and the company I'm with now value work-life balance so much, and just their employees' mental health and emotional health and physical health, and that is very important to me as well. I think it is to all of us, especially the world we live in now. And there's just so much balance. I mean, I start my day at between 8 and 8:30, and I'm done between 4 and 4:30. And I prioritize my day to make sure that I can manage all urgent tasks and urgent matters, make sure that my team has what they need. And I'm able to log off every day by 4:30. And after that, it waits until the next day. So a lot of it does come down to how you prioritize your tasks and making sure that you're not, getting behind. It can be the role that I'm in right now, being in startup. It can be a very independent role where you are told, okay, here's your sites, here, get them activated, get them going. And so you kind of are left to work on your own. So you have to have that self-initiation. You have to be a self-starter. You have to be able to organize on your own. You have to learn how to prioritize these tasks. Again, it's doable. It can be an adjustment at first, but it is very doable. But I still, as busy as I am, even now, I still find there's so much balance between work and home life.
Fantastic. Thank you, Morgan. How about you, Emily? You have a different role, do a different function. Do you feel the same way? How do you approach work-life balance?
Yeah, I would say I definitely feel similar, and that it is flexible. I guess I'd like to say also that a lot of the clinical research jobs for CROs, you do, maybe not entry level, because like sometimes I'll have to go into the office to ship supplies out. So that is something to note. I even do that in a pandemic. But the option to work from home is a really big aspect that I think is very appealing to a lot of people, especially now in a pandemic. We are of course home, but normally I would be office based. I think we are like 1 day a week you can be at home, but that's definitely a big benefit. And it is flexible. If you, obviously not if you had like a meeting scheduled at that time, but if you had to have a doctor's appointment at lunch, I think at least my experience, that's totally fine. You could go, I mean, I guess you'd have to, obviously let your line manager know, but you go and then it's, a longer lunch than normal, but then you just stay a little bit later. It's very flexible. So that was a lot different than my previous job in a lab where it was in teaching. There's no flexibility there. So it's very flexible. But again, you also need to kind of keep that work-life balance for yourself. There is so much to do. When I log off, I'm not necessarily I'm done with the urgent things. I'm not going to log off before urgent things are done, but that doesn't mean that my to-do list is done. That was something that I really had to be kind of okay with joining the industry, is that it does not end. You will always have another thing to do. And so you really need to look at it as chipping away at it. Like you're chipping away, you get 3 or 4 big things done today, but you might have another 2 added. Just being okay, and I guess, which some days are better than others, depending on what's, being piled on, but being okay with not being fully done. Especially in site management, when we're going along with the site. Site with startup, it's a little bit different. You do get to the end, you'll be given another site, of course, but there is an end kind of in site. Not as much for my job. At the very end, you'll have closeout, but you will always have another thing to do. You will always be able to clean something up more, clean the TMF up more. I'm not ever in the afternoon be like, what should I do? That's not the case. So if that is something that you don't like being busy, or you don't like that there's always the endless to-do list, you do need to think about that with this job, because that is something that is, I think, in any role in this industry is like that. It doesn't end, and you will always have a to-do list. But you just need to set that boundary, and you did everything you could today. It's time for dinner. You just got to log off.
What about you, Mary Lindsay? Do you have to interact with customers and travel, for example?
Yeah, so as a project specialist, you could potentially have some travel. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part. You said something with customers.
If you have to visit customers or interact with, have meetings with them,
Yeah.
remotely, but before face-to-face.
Yeah, so as a project specialist, you'll definitely have interaction with the customer virtually. So even if, for example, you have an office position as a project specialist, your interactions with your sponsor are going to be on meetings such as this. But I did, as a project specialist, get the opportunity to travel a few times. So I participated in an IM, an investigators meeting. And that's a meeting at the start of a trial where all of the different sites, the principal investigators from the sites, and other site staff, depending on their roles, come together for a meeting to just go over the study, what it's about, review the protocol, review the vendors that are involved, review the systems that are involved. Basically like a big jump start to get everyone familiar with the study, and be able to leave from that meeting and potentially have their site activated, and that sort of thing. I was able to go to that actually as a project specialist, even was given the opportunity to present, which was really nice, and a great learning opportunity. So that's something that you might do as a project specialist travel wise. Pre-pandemic, there were sometimes kickoff meetings where you may travel. I think right now where we are, we've seen those pretty much go
Virtual.
Part remote, and a lot of IMs right now are remote as well, but you can kind of start seeing some that are like trickling in that are in person now, that are being planned or happening recently. But that's the kind of interaction you may have in person with a sponsor, would be like a kickoff meeting or an investigator meeting. And then your ongoing interaction again will be like your sponsor meetings, which will be like a virtual teleconference type thing.
Great. And how that interaction, I'm sure there's a lot of preparation, how that kind of fits with your work-life balance. They're not very frequent, or they're perhaps once or two a year to the most, but how do you balance that? That's a very intense moment when you have to meet with a customer, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm going to be like, I hate presenting. I'm super nervous on this call right now, to be honest with you. But I think looking for, if you're kind of, stressed about something like that, traveling, look for the opportunities. And I got to go to Germany and present an IM, so I had not been to Germany before. So took the opportunity to go out, to a restaurant and some places after the restaurant and have a good time. So it was a career growth opportunity, but it also really was an opportunity for me personally, just to have, a cool new life experience. As far as work-life balance, on a day-to-day basis, like you said, like that travel is not going to be super frequent in this role. I think it just really, again, just goes back to setting your priorities, whatever role you're in, just, like Emily and Morgan were talking about. And Emily, you kind of spoke to this, which was funny, about like your to-do list is never going to be done. I remember asking my best friend that had worked in the industry, I was like, I asked her specifically, like, do you ever finish your list? Because I was like not finishing it, and it was driving me crazy no matter how long I worked. So I think it's understanding what are the priorities, what things actually do have to get done. And you've got to kind of manage that for like yourself, and also what other people need, because sometimes what you need to give them depends, they're dependent on getting their tasks done to get this from you. So kind of like figuring out all of those pieces and what's urgent, what can wait, and making sure you're addressing all of that. Being remote during COVID, I think it has sometimes, almost for me personally at least, been more difficult to pull myself away, because my computer is here, I am here, I can, go take my dinner, and then I stop back by and I check my emails, and the next thing I know, I've sat an hour and a half at my computer again. So I have to, personally, kind of being someone that's, gets sucked in easily, type A personality, I have to really kind of remind myself, like, hey, you do need to step away. It's okay to step away. This will wait. This will be here for you tomorrow. But so, I think work-life balance, it's company dependent, but it's also, dependent on the person, making sure that they're setting healthy boundaries as well.
That's so very true. Emily, I think you said this. There's always going to be a number of things that are going to be there for you waiting first thing in the morning, and you're never ever going to be able to be all done. I think that's one of the things that I learned very quickly in this industry. I was never up to date. I was always behind. It was not a nice feeling because I was never used to that. However, you learn to cope and to deal with that kind of environment, and you learn how to balance your life, your work. And like you were saying, I now have a door which I close during the weekend, because if not, I will come into my computer and I will probably work a number of hours over the weekend. So that door remains closed during the weekend. But I think it's important. Not only we need to set boundaries, but the companies also help us navigate. It's been a difficult year and a half with COVID. We are all working remote, and I think the lines between the life and the work were very blurry at some point. And I don't think we were able to determine when we're working, when we're resting. And I think it's very important. And the companies do promote that. I think that's very, very important and very healthy, because we absolutely want to maintain that work-life balance in check. Otherwise, you cannot continue to do that forever.
We do have a few questions. If Carolina, if I could ask you to address, one is an undergraduate degree a requirement for clinical research?
I mean, I will let others take that question, perhaps Morgan, but I think it will depend on the roles, I have to say. I think depending on the roles is the level of education that the companies are looking for.
Yes. So I know with my previous company, we had a position was a records specialist position. And that role did not require an undergraduate degree, but it did still allow you to gain the experience being in the clinical research industry and move up. But again, it was basically so you could build your experience, your levels of experience, so that way you could move up. It would be essentially, okay, if you had this many levels of experience, or this many years of experience in this role, then that would equate to some level of undergraduate degree, whether it would be an associate's or a bachelor's or something like that. But it really is, I think, is dependent upon the company and definitely dependent upon the role.
Thank you. Another question that's come in is someone has written that they've tried to apply for positions and they've not yet been successful, and wondered if any of you would be willing to look at their CV and advise them on possible changes or improvements.
I can speak for myself. Absolutely, I'll be happy to help on that. I think the CVs need to, we talk about this, I think transferable skills. What are the things that will, since you don't have the experience, will make you a good candidate? But absolutely, that's something that we can absolutely work on. I don't know if there are other questions, Vivian.
Yes, there's another one about, basically the question is, are your companies hiring now? And of course, the other part is, so here's someone who's looking for a position, can you help them? So it's really a question about how involved you would be willing to be to talk with some of the people who are actually attending these webinars, if they've tried to get in, had some difficulties, or they need some advice on how to get in. Are you willing to have a conversation with them?
Yeah, I'll not speak for the panelists, but personally, I'll be happy to do that. I think it's definitely a conversation about what they want to do, how their CV looks like, and what positions they're looking at or they're wanting to apply to. But absolutely, Vivian, you can count on me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely more than happy to meet with anybody looking to get into this field. It's very rewarding. I have loved it. I've been in for about going on 5 years now, almost 6. And I have no regrets. I honestly wish I had found it sooner. So yes, I will 100% be willing to collaborate with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, and I can, completely agree with Carolina and Morgan. Happy to, help and, talk about different roles and, all those things where someone feels like they might fit in and be able to be that, pathway and bridge.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, Vivian, it's real important that we, everyone that is looking for an opportunity to kind of understand what are the opportunities the companies are offering. Like we said, I think Emily said this, there are so many possibilities where you can actually get a position. Sometimes we don't know them, we don't understand what they are, but probably they're a real good fit for what someone is looking for. So happy to address that and have a conversation.
Great. We don't, wait a minute, another question may have come in. Oh, it was, how do we get in contact with them? I just answered that in the Q&A. So I put my email address in there and I will connect you to the panelists and the moderator. We don't have any other questions right now, but if anybody in the audience has any others, now is the time to ask. We still have some time left, 15 minutes. So please ask.
If while we wait for people to ask questions, perhaps one more question for all the panelists. What are the 2 or 3 things that you enjoy the most in your current role? We'll start with Morgan.
I love the challenge. I'll start there. I love the fast pace. I love the challenge. Yes, it does stress me out. I too am very type A, so I really struggled with not getting that to-do list done in the beginning, especially switching to the startup role. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get this done right now. But finding that balance, it's really pushed me to do that. I will say I thoroughly, I guess just the culture of my department too. I really like having the opportunity to collaborate across multiple roles. So I'm not just working with people in startup, I'm working with, collaborating with sponsors, I'm collaborating with contract liaisons, I'm collaborating with sites. I've really enjoyed my previous position, was actually not site facing. We had a remote site monitor position that was site facing when I was in site management. So switching over to being site facing now, I've really enjoyed that. I've met a plethora of people from multiple backgrounds, and that has just been extremely fascinating and rewarding to be able to work with so many different people. I think that and knowing that this is such a critical role and it's such a this is such a purposeful position. You are behind getting patients alternate treatments to diseases that they're fighting. And you will be blown away by the personal connections it makes to your own life, to people that you know, and you're like, oh wow, I know someone with that disease, and look, here's a trial for it. It's so incredibly rewarding.
Great. Emily?
Yeah, mine's similar, and kind of things that we've already touched on before, but it's different every day. That I really liked, especially coming from a lab, it was very repetitive. So I really like that it's different every day, and that it's challenging in a different way. You learn something new all the time. A site comes to you with a question that you've never heard of, and you're like, wow. Wow. So there's always something that you're like, wow, I would have never thought of that, or so that definitely keeps you on your toes. It keeps you honest, keeps you humble. I enjoy that aspect of it. I really also enjoy a lot of the site management part is kind of, I'm not an auditor, but you kind of feel like you're doing auditing stuff. They'll send you documents, so you need to review them, and again, also type A. So also, I would call myself a little bit OCD. You look for the little, what's the issue? Oh, they didn't sign something. Okay, that's a problem. They didn't include a zip code. They didn't include the date. Like in my role, you do a lot of kind of auditing, reviewing, finding the issues, fixing them. I really enjoy that. Sometimes you're like, wish I didn't see that, but now I gotta fix it. The auditing part of it, you need to do reviews to make sure, again, everything is clean and in a good spot. So for us, that's reviewing the TMF. It's quarterly, so that's every, quarterly. So that's quite often too. I like that aspect of it a lot. And I guess lastly would be that I like working with all the different teams, and you kind of feel like you're working towards a common goal. At the end of the day, like you, CRO, the site, the sponsor, we're all working towards a common goal. We're working together. So viewing it that way really helps, relate to the sites, communicate better. And the fact that like a lot of the CROs in this area and in general, like are global. So I work with people, and that is an extra challenge, but you might work with people on your project team that are in Europe. I work very closely with a coordinator that's in Austria. So our time zones don't necessarily always overlap completely, but you figure it out and you then, adapt. And yeah, just learning, and then you learn about other cultures. And then, I find we're talking about something, but then we're discussing the pandemic a little bit, like what is it like over there? And so that's really interesting to me. I find that really interesting and really cool. And same with the sponsors. I mean, at my previous CRO, we had a sponsor that was in Germany. So I had to, try to figure out how to understand the accents, but it's fine. So it's just really interesting. And I think, yeah, really exciting, really rewarding and different every single day.
And I hate to interject, but we got several more questions in.
Yeah, I was going to actually go to those.
If you can see them, go ahead.
Yes, there's one from someone that has a PhD and they're having some issues, or they're not getting any traction with their applications. It looks like the hiring managers think with a PhD they're absolutely overqualified, and they may not be able to fulfill the role. It depends on the area that probably you want to work. I think it's important that the PhD is not the center of the conversation, first of all. I have to say, personally, we have hired PhDs as CRAs, and they have moved quickly to the project management area, for example, and they have done a beautiful job while they were CRAs, and they continue to do it as a project managers or project leads, depending on the company you're working on. But I don't think the PhD will prevent you from starting on a starting position. I think it's just a matter how you pose that degree on how it's going to help you to navigate this entry-level role and then move up in the industry. There's another one from someone that is a nurse and has been trying to find a role that will be fitting. I don't know if anyone has any suggestions from their companies.
The previous company I worked for actually has a department. It's their pharmacovigilance department, and they are constantly seeking nurses out for roles like that.
Yeah, I would say that as well as the monitor role, because a lot of it, you need that medical knowledge, that medical terminology. And some companies, that's like a requirement. You need to be a nurse or some other thing in the medical field, but especially the safety roles, if you're not wanting to travel, that's a big one too.
And like Emily said, the monitor role can sometimes lead to a clinical trial manager role, where you're kind of overseeing the clinical side of the trial and overseeing the monitors. And that can be a really interesting role to get into as well. And I do know several of my previous clinical trial managers have been nurses before in their prior experience.
And I will offer one more insight about nurses. We do have in IQVIA, and I don't know if other companies have it, but it's what we call a clinical trial educator. And they work really close by CRAs, and they are part of study teams, but they work directly with investigators, and they support recruitment in general. So it's a role that needs traveling, needs to go on site. However, it's not the same role as the CRA, but they profile nurses to become clinical trial educators. So that's another opportunity. There's another question about any recommendations for any certification courses for entry-level jobs in QA or documentation after a career break. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one.
I'm not aware of any certification courses. I'm not sure if Mary Lindsay or Emily might be, but I I do know as far as, coming back after a career break, I know several people and some that I'm mentoring now that are returning after taking a break in their career. And as long as like Mary Lindsay said, she couldn't have said it better, identifying those transferable skills. Identify your skills, know what your skills are, know what your strengths are. And if you can speak to that in an interview and you can, explain that or describe it on your resume, I really think that you have a really positive shot of getting your foot in the door.
Yeah, there are some programs that will certify with QA, but I don't know what level of experience they're required to be able to be certified. So just keep that in mind. But if you are coming back from a break, I absolutely agree. Think about your transferable skills and what positions may be suitable for you. Okay, so I think those are the questions. If you have more questions, please let us know. But Mary, Lindsay, I just want to make sure that I give you the opportunity. What are the 2 or 3 things that you enjoy most about your role right now?
Thanks, Carolina. I think one of the things I really enjoy the most about my role, and that I've actually enjoyed in all of my roles at different levels and at different places, is just the opportunity to train and mentor the people that are coming in. As someone, that came in without this industry experience, and it was a huge career shift, I was so appreciative of those people who took that extra time to mentor me, to train me, to teach me new things. And, honestly, were just patient with me on some things. I would be lying if I said everything came to me like that. I wish it did. It didn't. So, and I found people, and kind of like people in the office that worked with me. And then oddly enough, I had to create for example, I had to create our timelines for a study, which was a whole program, the Microsoft project. I had never used that before. And our site startup associate, who was not responsible at all for creating those timelines, but knew very well how to use that program, took the time to meet with me outside of his, remit, and spent a few hours with me, like making sure it was all perfect for the timelines for the whole study. And, just being so grateful for all of that, wanting to give back and do that. And it's so great, just being able to see people that you're helping like progress in their careers as well. So that's been really something that I've enjoyed, being able to have the opportunity to do. And you like I said, you can train and mentor someone in any role. You don't have to be a trainer. You don't have to be someone high up. You can train, across roles, just like the site startup associate was training me, like cross roles with different things. Another thing I really kind of enjoy on like the technical side, which is funny because I hated it so much at first because I just didn't know how to do it. I actually really like doing timelines now, figuring out all of the little pieces and how this, will impact that. But if this doesn't happen, it'll shift that out, and if it shifts that out, and really like, working to, develop those timelines, and also working with everyone to get their input on like the different things that need to be done to get from A to Z. So I really kind of enjoy that technical piece of it as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I probably will going to share as well what I like the most about my role. I love learning. I think that's one of the things that I continue to do every day. I've been with the company for 23 years, and I don't think I have had a day where I have not learned something. And that for me is incredibly important. Otherwise, I'll probably be already bored. I love to travel. Some people find that very daunting. I love to go on site and perhaps spend the week out of my house. I don't have a problem with that. When I was a CRA, I was traveling probably 5 days of the week, every single week, and I had no problems. And I actually still miss it, which is really interesting for some people. And the other thing that I love that Emily mentioned is I get to work with people across the globe. And I think that's incredible what you learn not only from the work, but also from a personal perspective, from everyone you have to interact with, is something that it's priceless. And I treasure that. And perhaps it's one of my highlights every time, because I have made connections that last to today. When I started as a CRA in with people in different countries, and I treasure those connections very, very much. So I just wanted to share that there's a lot of opportunities in this industry, and I think those highlights that all of us were able to give are just a few things that you probably are looking for in your next steps. Vivian, I don't know if there are other questions.
I think we have answered all the questions. So I really want to give a huge thank you to the moderator and all the panelists. You guys were awesome tonight. We really enjoyed everything you had to say. I wrote down all the tips for the interview because you gave so many really good tips. They were great. Just for the rest of you, if you want more information about careers in clinical research and on North Carolina CROs, please visit ncbiotech.org/CRO. Keep an eye on your email, as we will be having future events, and we hope to see you then. And have a wonderful night. And thanks again to the panelists. I've received a few thank yous and wows from the audience. So you guys were awesome. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.